Hello children. Children, this video is for class 12 economics and I am going to continue the demand and law of demand. Children, in the last video we had completed the meaning of demand and types of demand. Now today we will discuss about the factors affecting demand, or we can say determinants of demand. Children, today we are going to discuss determinants of demand. Children, what is the meaning of determinants of demand? Determinants of demand means those factors which influences the demand, or in simple we can say the factors which affects the demand. Which affects the demand means these are those factors by which either the demand increases or the demand decreases. Children, there are number of factors, there are various factors by which the demand increases or the demand decreases. So what are those factors by which demand increases or demand decreases? Let us discuss one by one. Children, the most important factor by which demand increases or decreases is the price of the commodity. The first factor which affects demand is the price of commodity. Children, this is the most important factor which affects the demand, which is price. Children, a rise in the price of commodity, results fall in demand. As the price rises, the demand decreases, and as the price decreases, a fall in the price results an increase in demand. So price is the most important factor which affects the demand, because it is human nature, human tendency to buy more at less price and to buy less at more price. So price is the most important factor which affects the demand. Now our second factor is the income of consumer. Income of the consumer. In general, what we think, as the income increases, demand also increases, because as the income increases, it increases the purchasing power of the consumer. So as the income increases, purchasing power increases, demand also increases. But when we take income as a factor affecting demand, we consider two types of goods. And what are those two types of goods? Normal goods and inferior goods. Children, first of all, you should know the meaning of normal goods and the meaning of inferior goods. Children, what is the meaning of normal goods? Normal goods means those goods which are used by middle class people, means normally consumed goods. And inferior goods are those goods which are generally used by poor people. Okay? So, for normal goods, the demand of normal goods increases with an increase in income, and demand for normal goods decreases with fall in income. Let us see here. Let's take the example of normal goods. So what happens with normal goods? When the income of the consumer increases, demand also increases. As the income increases, it results increase in demand. With the increase in income, there is increase in demand also in the case of normal goods. Okay? But in case of inferior goods, as the income as the income increases, the demand for inferior goods decreases. This is income and this is demand for inferior goods. Children, there is a direct relationship between income and demand. Direct relationship between income and demand for normal goods, because as the income increases, demand also increases. But in case of inferior goods, there is an inverse relationship. Inverse relationship between income and demand in case of inferior goods. Why it is so? Why the demand for inferior goods decreases when income increases? Because as the income increases, those people who are consuming inferior goods, they switch over to normal goods. As the income increases, who consumes inferior types of goods? Inferior goods are generally consumed by poor people. What happens with them? When their income increases, what they do? They switch over from inferior goods to normal goods. And that is why when the income increases, when the income increases for the consumer of inferior goods, when the income increases for the consumer of inferior goods, what happens? As the income increases, the demand of inferior goods decreases. So there is an inverse relationship. Between income and demand for inferior goods. But for normal goods, there is a direct relationship. There is a positive relationship between income and demand. So children, here there are two things: the demand for normal goods, the demand for inferior goods. The demand for normal goods increases with an increase in income and decreases with decrease in income. Means the demand for car, the demand for air conditions, the demand for jewelries. For these items are taken as normal goods. For these items, the demand increases with the increase in income and the demand decreases with the decrease in income. But for inferior goods like maize, jowar, these are inferior food items. So the demand for these products or these commodities decreases with an increase in income and increases with decrease in income. So inverse relationship is here and here it is direct relationship. Okay children, now the third factor which affects demand is the price of related goods. Now children, what are related goods? Related goods means those goods which have some kind of connection with them, like tea and coffee. Tea and coffee are substitute of each other. So what kind of connection with tea and coffee? They are substitute of each other. If we want to refresh ourselves, either we can have tea or we can have coffee. Okay, so tea and coffee are substitute of each other. Water or cold drink, they are also substitute of each other. If we want to quench our thirst, we can have water or we can have cold drink. If water is not available, we can quench our thirst with the cold drink also. So these are substitute goods. There is one more type of good which is complementary goods. Complementary goods means those goods which are used together. Like car and petrol, pen and ink. These goods are used together. Okay. So what are related goods? Related goods are either substitute goods or complementary goods. So what happens, children? When the price of related goods increases or decreases, it also affects the demand. Let's take an example of tea and coffee. Now children, suppose tea and coffee, these are substitute goods. These are substitute of each other. Now suppose tea is of 300 per kg and coffee is of 800 per kg. Now if the price of coffee increases to 1200 kg. Now the coffee is 1200 per kg. The price of coffee increases to 1200 per kg. Now what will happen? Those who were consuming coffee, now it is difficult to afford coffee when its price becomes 1200. So the consumer of coffee will now switch over to tea. So in this case, when the price of coffee increases, the demand for coffee decreases. The demand for coffee decreases. This is the price and this is the demand. But it will affect the demand for tea also. An increase in the price of coffee will affect the demand for tea also. What kind of effect? As the price of coffee increases, the demand for coffee decreases. It's true. But what will happen to tea? The demand for tea will increase. Children, there is no change in the price of tea. There is no change in the price of tea, but still the demand of tea is increasing. Why? Why the demand of tea is increasing? Because the consumer of coffee, those who were the consumer of coffee, now they switch over to tea. Why they switch over to tea? Because now it is difficult to afford coffee. Why it is difficult? Because the price of coffee is increased. That is why they switch over to tea and its result an increase in the demand of tea. So as the price of related goods increases or decreases, it also affects demand. Now take one more example of price of related goods. Now this example is for complementary goods like car and petrol. Car and petrol. Children, they are complementary to each other because they are used simultaneously. They are used together. If we have car, we need petrol also. So car and petrol are used together. They are complementary to each other. Now children, if the price of car will increase, if the price of car increases, naturally it will decrease the demand of car. The price of car if increases, it will affect the demand of car, but parallelly it will affect the demand of petrol also. It will affect the demand of petrol also. Irrespective, there is no change in the price of petrol. There is no change in the price of petrol. Still, the demand for petrol will decrease. Why? The demand for petrol will decrease because there is a fall in the demand of car. There is a fall in the demand of car. There was no change in the price of petrol, but still the demand for petrol decreases because there is an increase in the price of car. Since car and petrol are used together, when the demand for car decreases, the demand for petrol also decreases because they are complementary to each other. So this was the third point, price of related goods. Now children, our fourth determinant is taste and fashion. Children, taste and fashion also influences demand. When the fashion changes, the demand for the current product decreases, and the demand for new fashionable product increases. So taste and fashion also